John Robbins, our guest this hour, has been called the leading voice in the world for restoring humanity to its proper relationship with food, the earth, and health. Author of award-winning Diet for New America, The Food Revolution, and other books, John's newest book, No Happy Cows, Dispatches from the Front Line of the Food Revolution, takes a candid look at what we're doing to the animal community that ends up on our tables, to the people who take part in growing or producing things we eat, and what it's doing to the earth. His book is written with compassion for both the animals and humans involved in what can best be called brutality, sometimes called animal husbandry in general. He offers alternatives that already exist to stop the cruel suffering we impose on the animal kingdom every day of the year, to the human population, to our health, and to the earth's well-being. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you, Zohara.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and your newest book is just, I'm glad I have studied all this stuff for 3 decades, or I don't know that I'd be able to get through the book, because you have really brought it all together in one place. So I'd like, if you don't mind, just to start with something personal, because you've been doing this work for 30 years or more. How have you changed over these decades?
Well, I've seen a lot of opportunities missed. I've seen a lot of opportunities where we could have made shifts that would have created a more humane and sustainable and ethical food system go by the wayside. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like there's a war going on. And on the one side, and the side that seems to be winning, there is Monsanto, there's McDonald's, there's Coca-Cola, there's industrial agriculture. And they're committed to profit. And on the other side, there is a growing number of people who are committed to eating healthfully and eating food that's produced in harmony with the earth and its creatures. And these people don't have the money that Monsanto does. They don't have the political power or clout in Washington that Monsanto does. But they're growing all the time. They want their food to be organic if possible, or certainly low input, sustainably grown. They want to see if they're eating meat products or animal products, they want them humanely raised and humanely slaughtered. They don't want to see the cruelty. They don't want to see the brutality ending up on their plates. They don't want misery on their menus. Even if they're eating animal products, they want them from systems that are kindly raised. And so, but the feedlot system and the factory farm system isn't listening to those people, except they'll market as if. And they'll pretend that it's greenwashing, it's humane washing. And one of the reasons I titled my latest book, No Happy Cows, is because contrary to the propaganda from the dairy industry, there are no happy cows in industrialized agriculture today. The way dairy cows are treated, the way hogs are treated, the way chickens are treated, the way beef cattle are treated, it's mercenary, it's predatory. It's just extract as much profit as you can from the animal, and there's no consideration for that animal's experience. And most Americans really do care about animals. We love our companion animals, our dogs and cats, and we treat them well for the most part. We have laws against cruelty to animals in this country. But interestingly, every single one of the 50 states has legislation in place prohibiting certain kinds of cruelty to animals. And every single one of the 50 states exempts animals destined for human consumption from that legislation. So if you're raising an animal for meat or dairy, you can do anything to that animal as long as it's considered customary farming practice. And there are no prohibitions against cruelty. And I think that is something we need to change, because it's an insult to our compassion. It's an insult to our humanity and our need to live with a bond to the animals that are part of our world.
Well, certainly what you describe is what we've seen in terms of this wholesale divorce of not only our natural self, but nature itself and all things that are natural. And so this revolution that you speak to and this war that's going on is something some of us have spent our lifetime as members of, being witness and broadcasters of all of the wonderful options that there already are. I mean, Eric Herm, who wrote a book called Son of a Farmer, Child of the Earth, and like so many of the Acres USA farmers who read that paper of Charlie Walters from so many decades, know that organic agriculture is better agriculture. Monsanto agriculture is death agriculture. Genetically modified organisms means death to the planet if this continues. So I want to come back for a moment to something you mentioned, John, about the political clout of those of us that really do want to be good stewards of the planet and really do want to restore the earth to balance and make sustainable systems the norm. Even in the Obama administration, I voted for President Obama, but I'm as disappointed as are many other green people. And you point out that the revolving door between Monsanto and the Bush administration, which I covered, was clearly known. And it's also true in this administration. Describe for our audience how that took place.
Well, I'm with you on that. I also voted for Obama, and I'm also been very disappointed in many ways. The Democratic Party has not been really taking the side of organic agriculture. Just as much as the Republican Party, they have been in cahoots with Monsanto, and many of the executives and lobbyists for Monsanto, paid people by Monsanto, have been taken into key positions during the Obama administration in the FDA and the USDA and the whole food system. And this is what's called the revolving door, because they move in and out of industry and government and they represent Monsanto, and then they supposedly represent the public interest. But they know that when their time as a civil servant is over, they will be rehired by Monsanto. Some of them are still board members at Monsanto while they're working for the government. It's really incestuous.
And frightening. I mean, you pointed out that Michael Taylor, who was promoted to the Deputy Commissioner of Foods, is the same one that made it possible for Monsanto to get GMO foods into the U.S. without really any safety studies at all. And, of course, this poses such significant – this is something we're going to talk about at length later in the evening, but you're right to point it out. And so when you look at this kind of revolving door and the political cahoots between a Monsanto and the administration and Congress and the lobbying, we see it in things such as soy and what happens when the dairy industry decides they don't want people to consume soy milk or soy products.
We do, and then they say, well, you can't call it soy milk, you have to call it soy beverage because it isn't milk, as if cow's milk was the only thing that could be called milk. Actually, cow's milk is one kind of milk, but it's not human milk, which is really the milk that infants ought to be consuming.
No question.
And unless, I often say, cows are born, they are ruminant animals, they have 4 stomachs, as we call it. They will gain several hundred pounds in their first year. So if your baby has 4 stomachs and you want your baby to gain several hundred pounds in its first year, maybe cow's milk is the way to go. But other than that, I think human milk, breast milk, is the way to go. And this, it sounds facetious, but really what I'm trying to say is we have gone so far from what's natural. Mm-hmm. We often forget, and many women who give birth today aren't supported. They don't get the support they need so that they can breastfeed successfully, and that's a shame. But it's not a shame for the formula manufacturers. They're quite happy with it because it's a commercial success for them. And similarly, the companies, the biotech companies, that are patenting seeds in order to control our food supply and buying up all the seed companies while they're at it, and developing seeds with specific traits that require their herbicides, their proprietary weed killers, such as Roundup, for their use, they really aren't thinking about human health.
Not at all.
They're not trying to provide us with answers to world hunger. They're not really thinking about the ecosystem and how it can thrive. But they will tell us that they are. Oh, they'll tell us how green they are. They'll tell us how GMOs are going to feed the world. They'll tell us that their milk California cheese comes from happy cows. They'll tell us what they think we want to hear. And if we're satisfied with hearing it and think we can feel good because we believe it, and we don't actually press for real change, we become complicit. And we become subordinate to their agenda. And that is what has to change.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because as Eric Herm, who I mentioned that we're going to speak with later in the evening, pointed out, we can point our fingers at Monsanto, but he as a farmer says, I have to educate the farmers. Because if the farmers weren't hooked on these drugs, these chemicals, fertilizers, herbicides, Monsanto's Roundup, they wouldn't have a market. And as they go overseas, of course, there's a big fight. But there's a tremendous change, as you point, in terms of the general consciousness of the consumer. And that's fortunate because it is the consumer, I think, that will drive these changes. It's a question of how soon can we make them happen. So we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, I want to look at some of the really wonderful things you've done, and I'd particularly like you to share with us the story of your evening with the hog farmer, because I think the compassion for those of us who have been activists for the good all our lifetimes. I know for myself when I was younger, I was so angry and such a finger pointer at the bad guys, only to sort of mature and to understand there is no us and them. It's just us. And if we can't educate and convince others who don't see the danger and what's happening, then that's something that we have to improve at. So we'll be right back. Our guest, John Robbins, his most recent book, No Happy Cows, Dispatches from the Frontlines of the Food Revolution.
Hello, my name is Matthew Fox, and I'm a spiritual theologian, author of a number of books, including Christian Mystics and The Pope's War. And you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zoe, and I commend Dr. Zoe for her wonderful work and for having a program that offers alternative ways of seeing the world and seeing it through the glasses of spirituality and ethics. So stay listening.
John's website is John Robbins, ROBBINS.info. Another website he promotes, yesworld.org. Hey, John, what is that website, yesworld.org?
Well, that's the website of a group called Yes, which works for human rights, works across all kinds of differences, race, creed, class, nationality, religious, brings people together, young leaders from many, many countries. They've done week-long events in, I think, over 60 countries now.
Wow, how fantastic.
And they go into hot spots. And, for example, they've had a lot of work in Jordan where they bring together young leaders from Israel and Palestine and other Middle Eastern countries and get them to talk to each other and find common ground. Mm-hmm. And these are often people who have been conditioned or trained to fear each other, even hate each other. And when they meet as human beings, sometimes some things happen that shift that dynamic from a polarized hostility to a level of communication and cooperation. They see the humanity and they want to work on each other's behalf. It's a beautiful thing.
That's lovely. I'll have to go visit it. Well, your own story of your visit with the hog farmer reminded me of that kind of understanding that if we find some way to open each other's hearts, maybe we can listen better and learn and change quicker. So tell our audience a little bit about that journey.
Well, yes. He was ran what he called a pork production facility. I would have called it a pig Auschwitz because the animals were in individual cages, three tiers high, and the cages were barely larger than the animals' bodies, and they were steel slats. So the animals' waste would drop through the slats onto the heads of the animals below. It was really terrible, and the warehouse was stuffed with these cages, and the smell was overpowering. And I really didn't like this guy at first. I mean,
and you went. I mean, people should know you went, as I recall, undercover to expose abuse in the industry of hog farming.
I had no bumper stickers on my car, and I was dressed, and I spoke in a manner that would fit into the culture there. And I didn't want to betray my own feelings. I worked very hard, actually, to just be a simple person. I told him I was an author. I was writing about animal agriculture, and I would like to have the benefit of his experience and his thinking and his wisdom. And he showed me around, and what happened was eventually his wife invited me to stay for dinner, and I did. And I began to see the human decency in these people, although I still could not condone the way they were treating the animals in their care. But care is often a strange word. There was no care expressed in the animals in their control, in their dominion.
No, it's just a product. It's not even a breathing, sentient creature to them. It's just a thing.
Exactly. And yet, as I got to know him, I found out that he didn't like one bit where the industry was going. He felt he had to do what he was doing to keep up, to compete. But he didn't like it, and he actually had a feeling for the animals that he was subordinating to and suppressing in order to do what he was doing, and it was causing him all kinds of distress and physical problems and illness. And we became friends, actually, and he ended up selling his operation and moving back to Missouri, where he'd grown up, and having a small organic farm, and he sold vegetables at farmers markets, and he had a few pigs. But he had a pet-a-pig program. He didn't butcher the animals. He gave them lots of space. And he had a contract with the school system. The kids would come out on buses and on a field trip and get to visit his farm and taste some of the food, the fresh food. It was just pick a tomato right off the plant and eat it. And they also got to pet the pig and learn how intelligent pigs are and how friendly they can be if you treat them right, which he now does. And so his transformation always stands for me as inspiration.
Yes.
And it's cheap and easy and convenient to blame the farmer, but really, the farmers are almost at the mercy of economic forces over which they have no control. And there's no mercy in those forces. As well as
you and others have pointed out, the subsidies the U.S. government offers is only for a particular kind of industry factory farming, and it's not for the more natural, humane methodology that preserves the soil and preserves the earth and human health. If you would, John, I'd like you to jump a bit to the bovine growth hormone and what's going on as a result of what's being fed to livestock that then comes into the human chain of life.
Well, bovine growth hormone is a genetically engineered Monsanto's product that is injected into dairy cows to force them to produce more milk, which it does. It also takes a tremendous toll on the animals, and their udders get very large, and they develop mastitis, which is an udder infection. And they develop mastitis so predictably when they're injected with this hormone that when Monsanto sells the hormone to the farmers, the dairy operations, it comes packaged with the antibiotics that Monsanto also manufactures to treat the mastitis that will inevitably occur. So it's making these animals sick. It's producing more milk, but we don't need more milk. And there's a great deal of inference that the milk contains high levels of IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, which is correlated to early puberty in girls and correlated to cancer growth in adults. We're seeing some very painful situations where young girls start to menstruate at earlier and earlier ages due to these hormone-disrupting chemicals in our environment, endocrine disruptors. And IGF-1 and bovine growth hormone is highly implicated in this.
Well, and when people sit and listen to this, they might think, well, I don't eat beef, but they do eat ice cream. Oh, I don't drink milk, but they do eat butter. And so all of these byproducts that come from the animal industry or the industry of using animals has everything that's gone into the animal's own body. And people forget that just because they may not be a meat eater, and some people listening go, well, I gave meat up, so I don't have to worry about it. But we do have to worry about this for everybody.
We do. And for example, factory farms and feedlots routinely use antibiotics. And I don't mean as medicines to cure or heal a sick animal. they're used as growth promotants. They're mixed into every meal the animal eats throughout its life. And this enables these animals to survive for a few months under these grotesque conditions in which diseases proliferate and spread rapidly if they occur. So they give them antibiotics. 80% of the antibiotics used in the United States are used as growth promotants in factory farms. They're not used as medicines for people or even for animals. And the result of that is, if you were intending to develop a system or produce a system that would give us antibiotic-resistant bacteria, you couldn't design something more effective than what we've done. And we're losing the efficacy of our antibiotics because we are overusing them in livestock production for no good purpose except to enable factory farms to do what they do, which is so cruel to the creatures. Need to ban that use of antibiotics. We need to do it immediately. Western medicine relies greatly on antibiotics, and there's a lot of indications we are approaching the post-antibiotic era wherein our antibiotics are no longer effective. And that's a tragedy of epic proportions, and for no good reason whatsoever.
Other than for-profit endeavors, and that's the focus, is how much money can be made and how quickly. I mean, you pointed out that not only is only 20% of antibiotics given to people in the United States, but diseases like tuberculosis, meningitis, typhoid fever, and dysentery are cropping up in hospitals. And this is as a result of antibiotic-resistant diseases, as a result of the animals having been given so many antibiotics. It goes into, people think, well, I just eat a little meat. Or then they don't think about that it's gone into the rivers through the waste material, or that it's gone into the water supply through... So describe for us this cycle and the kinds of options that already exist to break it, so that when people are listening, they think about these things, there's ways that every person can make a difference by what they buy.
Well, yes, and how they vote.
Yes.
You could be a total vegan. You could eat no meat or dairy products or anything, and yet the antibiotics that you may rely on if you get ill are being destroyed. Their efficacy is being destroyed by our factory farm system today, and their use and the antibiotics use there. So you're not immune from the damage. Yes, we want to make personal choices that are healthy for us as individuals, that express our concern and our caring for animals, that are congruent with our compassion for the world and our desire that our food system be one that's in harmony with the earth and its powers and its resources and its future. But at the same time, we need to vote with our food choices. We need to also vote with our votes. And we really need to get policies in place, for example, that would prohibit the use of antibiotics in factory farms as growth promotants. We also need to get legislation that would require the labeling of GMOs, genetically engineered food. And just this year already, both Connecticut and Vermont, 2 states, came very, very close to passing legislation that would mandate such labeling. And in both cases, right at the very end, just as it was about to become law, Monsanto stepped in, bullied, and threatened to sue the states, and the states backed down. And this, when a state can be intimidated by a corporation, it shows how the power dynamic has shifted and how corporations are really ruling the world right now.
No question about it. I mean, and there's no reason anymore to speak about it as though something that is, just a little handicap. What it really is a distortion of the purpose of community overall. Now, you also talk about other things such as free trade and fair trade. I mean, there's other products we consume other than animals, and I've spent almost 30 years now on the air talking about the harm that's done to the chickens and the pigs and the cows. And so we've covered this a lot, and the fish and the dolphins. But one of the things I sometimes feel is missing, that individuals feel that they can't do anything about it. So I want to talk about something that people can do something about. Let's just talk about chocolate. People love chocolate.
Well, I love chocolate too.
I do too.
and it's actually a healthy food if you get the dark chocolate. You don't need milk chocolate, and you certainly don't need the highly sweetened chocolates. But the darker chocolates have more of the polyphenols and other and the antioxidants and the good things that are in chocolate. But there's this other piece to it, which is the social and economic reality of our times. Most of the world's chocolate comes from the Ivory Coast and other nations adjacent to it. And in that part of Africa, there's a tremendous amount of child slavery taking place, and particularly in the chocolate industry. It is a terrible thing. It's really terrible. But you can be sure that the chocolate you're buying was not harvested by child slaves if you buy organic chocolate and if you buy fair trade chocolate. I think the fair trade movement is a really powerful thing today.
Absolutely.
We're seeing fair trade chocolate. We're seeing fair trade coffee. We're seeing increasing products that are fair trade. And it's a way that the consumer can get into alignment with the greater good and make sure that they're not complicit in the
exactly
brutal exploitation of children.
And I think we see this in so many things. You know, maybe 20 years ago you couldn't go into almost any grocery store and find organic produce, but you can today. And you couldn't go into stores and find chocolate labeled fair trade or coffee labeled fair trade, but we can today. So for people to plead ignorance that they didn't know is just not good enough anymore. So my hope is that by the little thing millions can do, a movement can really happen, rather than always thinking that a few good people are going to get out there and fight the nasties and make the change. And I think that we're called upon for a different kind of activism and transformation, which is for millions of everybody to do little things in their life without having to change a whole lot in their life, but to choose good.
Well, I agree with you, and everybody could do something. And you, if you're a coffee drinker, you can get fair trade. Starbucks carries some fair trade coffees, and if you make sure that that's the one you order there, then Starbucks is going to notice that their customers want it, and they're going to increase their supply of it, and they're going to have greater variety of it, different brews and so forth. And that'll grow. This is how it grows. The consumer demand is really important. The problem is sometimes industries respond to the consumer demand by faking it, by
true.
greenwashing.
Yeah, very true.
And that's why they pretend to be ethical. It's marketing.
Well, and you talk about that with the Hershey Corporation, which certainly wasn't its founder's nature or his intent.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of pressure on Hershey's right now to get with the program. They have been obstinate. They have been pretending to improve things while doing almost nothing. But fortunately, some good groups who are trying to keep this company's feet to the line and make them actually do what they say they want to do and say that they're going to do. We're starting to see some results. Currently, though, if you're going to buy chocolate, it's an imperative to get it either organic or fair trade or both. And that's how you know you're not contributing to child slavery. That's really the only way you can know today.
No, and the stories that have been written on it, I mean, if any of you in the audience have read them, it's just horrendous. I mean, these children are stolen or sold into slavery by their parents, believing their kids are actually going to go make a living and send money home to the village.
Exactly.
And instead they're beaten and starved to death, and they don't make anything. It's unbelievable for the children who have escaped and been able to tell the story and show their body scars. It's God bless. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, I'd like to look at one of my favorite subjects, which is fried chicken. We'll be back. John Robbins is our guest. His book, No Happy Cows, Dispatches from the Frontlines of the Food Revolution, a Canary Press 2012. Learn more at John Robbins. His last name is with 2 B's, like Robbins Ice Cream. That's the family. JohnRobbins.info.
Hello, I am Amit Goswami, author of The Self-Aware Universe and How Quantum Activism Can Save Civilization. And we're listening to 21st Century Radio with Zohara, Hieronimus. It's a wonderful show of the new paradigm that is going on right now.
I'm Hieronimus. As Ahmed says in quantum activism, do something small and imagine it big, and it has a ripple effect. John Robbins is online with us. His book, No Happy Cows, Dispatches from the Frontlines of the Food Revolution, is a Canary Press 2012 release. I encourage you to share it, read it, take it to a local high school or college, and make sure some younger people read it too. John, I want to come to fried chicken. When I was a kid, fried chicken was such a treat. I don't eat it anymore. I haven't for years. But when I saw, as you did, that a organization fighting breast cancer teamed up with a chicken company, I was a bit perturbed, like when I saw McDonald's in a children's hospital.
Yes, pink KFC buckets. It's an amazing thing that a cancer cure, cancer prevention organization, Susan G. Komen for the Cure, partnered with the fast food chain KFC in their Buckets for the Cure campaign. And it really is amazing because KFC, of course, took every chance it could to trumpet its donation of 50 cents to this group, to Komen, for every pink bucket of chicken that people bought. And Komen announced on its website that they were spreading educational messaging via the campaign, and they reached many, many people. Well, what kind of educational messaging was transmitted? Did it say anything about the critical importance that a good diet plays in maintaining a healthy weight and preventing cancer? No, of course it didn't. Do you think it mentioned the studies, the many studies that the National Cancer Institute has paid for and done that have shown a major increased risk of developing cancer that is associated with high intakes of fried meats and barbecued meats, just like the ones sold in those pink KFC buckets? You know, it's a really bizarre thing when these alliances form. I think Susan G. Komen for the Cure made a really bad mistake in doing this. Maybe they thought that they would be doing good, but it's a little bit like partnering with a tobacco company. Are we going to see pink cigarette packs and buy one for the cure?
No, we'll see. We'll see as a children's toy.
And there are other groups that aren't becoming poster companies for pink washing, and that are really helping people understand what they can do to prevent cancer. And that's what we need to do. Prevention is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We really need to focus on prevention much more than we have been.
And that, of course, is the choice of every person listening and every person they know who is an adult and buys food and makes choices about their lifestyle. And sometimes, of course, people, myself included, might choose what's easier. But you point out in your own life, and so many millions of people for centuries with a plant-based diet are much healthier people. They live longer with fewer complications and don't have the same sorts of diseases that we now see in our seniors, such as Alzheimer's and early onset of diabetes in children. That's another topic you covered, and I'm so glad you did, which is when these fast food joints like McDonald's spends $1 billion a year to promote how great they are. What in fact they're doing is really, and we now see it with our childhood population, of how many children in our country now are obese with diabetes as a result of fast food, sugar, and other really poor dietary choices.
Well, right now the Farm Bill is being debated in Congress, and 80% of the funding from the Farm Bill goes to the SNAP program. It used to be called food stamps. And you can't, there's a tremendous need for this program, by the way, and I think it should be enlarged, not cut, because people are hurting. And 1 in 7 Americans today depends on, to some degree, on the SNAP program to eat. And it's a tragedy that that's the situation, but it is the situation, and we have to help people. What's interesting is that the food stamps, or the SNAP program, can't be used to buy tobacco, rightfully so, can't be used to buy alcohol, rightfully so, but it can be used to buy soda pop and donuts and ice cream and candy, and it often is. And if we were to restrict the food stamps from being used in that way, then the convenience stores and the Walmarts and so forth that are taking in billions of dollars from these programs would start to carry more of the good foods and less of those junk foods. And we have healthier people who wouldn't need so much medical care. It would be a real step towards supporting people in eating more healthfully. And yet there's a real pushback from the Coca-Cola company and the Pepsi-Cola company and the junk food manufacturers against it, against restricting the use of them to healthier foods. And I think that we're not trying to, they say they want to preserve the choice of people. Well, people could, with their other monies, buy whatever they want. But with the food stamps themselves, government subsidies, why don't we promote healthier eating? This is just one of the ways that we could start to make it easier for people to do the right thing and help them to do the right thing. And we don't let them buy cigarettes with it. That's correct. We don't let them buy alcohol with it. That's correct. That's helpful to them. That's helpful to all of us. And I think that Coca-Cola and ice cream and some of these other very high-fat, very high-sugar foods, foods high in processed ingredients that are trans fats and hydrogenated oils and really bad for you foods. We should restrict them from the program, and then the food sources would be carrying the better foods.
Yeah, and also that if advertising if it were required to be honest, which it's not, which is why I guess we think of it as advertising, they can lie, they can make things up, they can say whatever they want. Like when the Coca-Cola company puts out vitamin water, and they know that it's not going to help anybody, anything. Sugar, we know, contributes to cancer, and cancer loves refined sugar. So if anybody is already diagnosed with cancer, try to knock out those white flour and white sugars from your diet so that you can give your body a chance to recover. When you look at all of this, John, I know for myself I've gone through periods of such despair that I'm not quite sure what to do next because I'm so overwhelmed by how bad the corporate world has made the planet. And then I think to myself, this is crazy, Zohara. There are always good people that are always going to do good things. How do you keep yourself going?
Because I know there are good people doing good things, and I want to be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be inspired, let myself to be inspired and uplifted and enlarged by the people who are being active, who are engaging with the problems, who are working for a better world, for a better life for their families, for a healthier way of life for all of us.
And
there are many, many such people, and some of them don't look or act the way we think they're supposed to look or act, so we don't see them.
Mm-hmm. That's true. It's not all the post-boomer granola crowd anymore, which I once counted myself among.
Exactly,
just,
and
mm-hmm.
great if you like granola or wheat germ or whatever, but there are people in all walks of life who are waking up
mm-hmm.
to the reality that we have created a food system. If you look at the food system and your own food world as a mirror, what do you see? Do you see self-respect? Do you see self-care? Do you see a food reality that you're living that is nourishing to your body and your mind and your heart and your soul and your relationships? Not many of us see that. Most of us see convenience. We see compromise. We see eating stuff that we know isn't really the best for us. We see ourselves participating and being complicit in things that we really aren't supportive of. When we take steps to greater integrity, to greater congruence with who we really are, when we take steps to bring ourselves into alignment with our souls and our love for the earth and our love for ourselves and what our bodies really need to thrive and flourish, then we're taking a stand for life. We're becoming powerful. We become responsible people. We become accountable for who we are. And that's infectious. That spreads. People feel it. They like it. They respond to it. And that's how as we do that, I sometimes think that the activism is one-to-one. Mm-hmm. That what really matters, the central unit of social transformation is the individual human heart.
Mm-hmm.
And as each of us connect with another person in integrity, in who we really are, in our love for life, then what happens is it grows, and we become part of a wave of awakening and of change. And I want to be part of that. And so I do everything I can to recognize the good in people and try to bring it forward.
Well, that's a beautiful journey. And I think that I just speak for myself, as I mentioned. I started as an activist at the age of 14, and it took me a long time to come out of my anger and to come to a compassionate love for all of the suffering that all humans, all animals, all the earth is sharing at this time, because there is an awakening, and it's a really important one. And so I agree with you that if each person can feel empowered to become the change they want to see in the world, as Gandhi said and as others have so wisely advised us, then we do change the world, and each of us can say at the end of our life that we really did try to make a difference.
Well, I think that a lot of us try, and a lot of us don't feel that we're being effective, that our efforts are bearing fruit. And I think that sometimes the fruitfulness of our efforts isn't available to our perception. It's hidden.
Right.
And yet, to the courage, the faith to continue even when you're not seeing the results. You know, if you plant a radish even, which is a very quick-growing crop, and if you pull it up too soon to see if the radish is how it's doing, you kill the plant. So there has to be some faith in the earth and in who we are as part of the earth, that there's something good in us, that when we look in the mirror, we see something in humanity that's worth our dreams, worth the struggle, worth the suffering, worth the effort. And you mentioned outgrowing or dealing with your anger in a way. I sometimes think people who aren't angry aren't paying attention. I mean, there's a lot to be outraged about. At the same time, though, we need to mature our anger. We need to live with it in a way so that it becomes commitment, so that it gets expressed as our convictions. So it grows into the warrior spirit. If we just play it out with violence and reactivity, that's the infantile form of anger. And the mature form of anger becomes passion, and it becomes dedication, and it becomes devotion, and it is a very powerful thing.
You have definitely been a model of one of these kinds of activists who has stayed the course, continued to educate people, opened your heart, opened your mind, and it's beautiful to watch in another person whose work you admire. And when reading No Happy Cows, I really felt the presence of your heart.
Oh, thank you. And I feel the presence of yours in being with you on this interview, and I'm really grateful to you for the work you are doing.
You know, the beautiful thing, and it's unfortunate that most of us don't get European papers, is that the European community is so much more vocal and so much more aware, and it's perhaps because our media has become so homogenized and so much the same boilerplate kind of reporting of polarization and just trying to make people opposite of one another rather than bringing them to unity consciousness. I see something in Europe I don't yet see covered in this country, even though, as you point out, it's happening. You and I are proof that it's happening, and all those in our listening audience who are also doing their best in their communities to make a difference know that it's happening. But our media doesn't do anything to support it.
Well, that's true. There is, fortunately, alternative media, your show being a prime example of it. And there are others. Fortunately, people can get their news from the Internet now.
True.
There are many news sites.
Huffington Post that you write for and others.
Manufacturing consent to the dominant reality, but are actually inspiring people to think for themselves and think critically and actually think objectively about what's happening rather than thinking that is constrained by the corporate agenda.
Exactly. Well, and I think as we both see, we're out of time, but, you know, there is a younger generation, and they've grown up with parents like us. And they know the truth, and so they come marching already with a big heart, with big hands, and I think the intelligence to make a difference. John Robbins, thank you for being with us. John's book, You're welcome, No Happy Cows, Dispatches from the Frontlines of the Food Revolution, Canary Press 2012. Folks, you can give this book to anybody, and they will get a picture of the entire agribusiness industry and what we can do to make the world sustainable.